17. The House Guest. Society's improved at every level, and culture spreads now even to the devil. Goethe. Faust, Part 1. Martin Finch came home one evening to find the devil in his living room. The devil was not exactly what Martin had expected the Prince of Darkness to look like, but then again, he had never given the subject too much thought. The devil wore a suit with wide lapels, shimmering with layers of gold sequins. The fitted suit jacket rested over a red silk shirt with a ruffled collar and sleeves. The shirt was accented by a gold tie, the knot fashionably loosened, with a tie pin set in the center. The pin was obsidian, with two little red horns of ruby and, what appeared to be, platinum sunglasses set over an unsmiling face with a lit cigarette etched next to the mouth. The devil's own face was immeasurably pale, although he had striking, high cheekbones, accented with a bit of blush, not unlike a drag queen might. His pupils were large and black, surrounded by very bloodshot white. His hair was slicked back with what appeared to be styling gel or oil so that his horns were prominent. The horns themselves were unquestionably authentic. They were a deep red, layered and cracked, just as an animal's might be. But they were also cared for, bearing the high gloss of a recent polishing and fresh, clear shellac. Gold beams of light stabbed out into the room from his sequin jacket and matching cowboy boots, much like the light might reflect off a disco ball at a club. The room was thick with the smell of sulfur. It was not from the source Martin would have imagined. But before we go any further, we must explain about Martin and his evening, pre-Prince of Darkness. Martin Finch was a wealthy hedge fund manager. His father had been a wealthy hedge fund manager, and his father had been a wealthy hedge fund manager. Martin was thinking about his accomplished genealogy that night as he drove home in his Alfa Romeo. Martin Finch had reached a comfortable plateau of wealth and luxury that was now, for the most part, permanent. He had too many aggressive investments to count, the security of a number of low-risk funds that continued to accumulate, and a quite sizable nest egg that was diversified, sheltered, and only promised to grow. Then he had his equity, not to mention cash savings, the interest able to support him. If he had chosen to be content. But he was not that sort of man. Why settle when he could have more, he always said. His suit was Brioni, one of only 100 handmade each year from a blend of some of the rarest fibers in the world, such as kivyuk, vicuña, and pashmina. The stitching was made with white gold. His watch was a Rolex GMT Master, a nice classic look he liked. His tie Turnbull and Asser, his shirt a Charvet, shoes Lingwood Russian calf, his belt and wallet both Salvatore Ferragamo, Python leather editions. Tie clip, cufflinks, and belt buckle today were 24-karat gold. But for tomorrow, he was already leaning towards the platinum set with the diamonds. He knew he was not the most handsome man. His shoulders were narrow, but at 50, he was still slim, and with his goatee, his weak chin looked a bit more masculine. But it was his money and power that made him irresistible to the opposite sex. His house was sleek, modern, and refined. He had practiced restraint in the decorating process. He thought so, at least, having kept the budget under $1 million. The garage door closed quietly as he stepped out of the car. Martin was accustomed to getting out of the car and smelling whatever dinner his maid, Agatha, a grandmotherly Greek woman, was preparing. But tonight, only the off gases of the cement floor, rubber, and a faint whiff of engine exhaust greeted him. He felt his mood move into some place between impatience and annoyance. For what he was paying the old woman, it was not unreasonable to expect dinner to be on time. He was debating how stern he would be upon greeting her. Would he ask her directly why dinner was late, which would elicit a stuttering response from her? Or better yet, he would say nothing, not even good evening, until she apologized and realized why she was getting the silent treatment. This would drive her into nervous fits of earnest work, which in the end would be more productive. Mr. Finch had hired her because he had decided a paid maid would be more reliable and ultimately less expensive than marrying again. Marriages produced children and divorces. He had already had 2 of each, and they were a drain on money and time. All these things were playing in his mind when Agatha burst into the garage. She was a fright. Her mascara was running down from her eyes, her hair was disheveled, and her apron tangled all about her. She ran up to Mr. Finch. She almost hugged him, but then she checked her advance. In one hand she shook an empty saucepan, with the other she repeatedly crossed herself.
Mr. Finch! Mr. Finch! Oh, it is terrible! Terrible! I am so afraid!
My God, woman, get a hold of yourself! She was panting as if she had just run a marathon, but she made no effort to catch her breath. Maybe she couldn't. He realized a heart attack would delay his dinner further, so he told her to calm down and breathe. She took a few gulps of air before spitting out,
He is in the house, in your living room, and he won't leave. I called the priest. I am terribly sorry. I hope you don't mind. But I was so afraid of him, and I didn't know what to do. He was giving away these.
She thrust a fistful of gift certificates to various fast food restaurants in Martin's face. When Martin refused to take them, she dropped them to the floor as if they were covered in spiders. She was shaking.
Orlando is in there with him.
Orlando, Martin's Haitian groundskeeper. Perhaps he might provide some answers to whatever mess this was turning into. Martin decided he would have to see the visitor, intruder, whatever, for himself. He walked inside and set his briefcase on the kitchen table. Orlando began calling to him in his nearly incomprehensible English once he heard Martin enter the house. Orlando was not his real name. His real name was something in Creole that was impossible to pronounce. Orlando had chosen the name Orlando when he had first moved to Florida. Martin suspected Orlando had chosen the name because it was the same city Disney World was in. However, Martin had never asked for clarification, reluctant to have his hunch validated and Orlando's poor taste confirmed. Mr. Finch sighed and walked into the living room, his phone in his hand, ready to call the police. Orlando was at the doorway, standing with a pitchfork aimed directly at the intruder, whose appearance has already been described. But in addition to his clothing, there were other items the devil had brought with him. A McDonald's Happy Meal sat unopened on the coffee table. Long strings of sulfur fumes hung in the air from his cigarettes. Mr. Finch noticed that the devil need not light these. He simply brought them to his blood-red lips, and they lit the moment he inhaled. The sulfur smell produced by these cigarettes brought Mr. Finch back to memories of his childhood, to the time he had found rotten Easter eggs in his refrigerator, or when he'd set off a stink bomb in the school restroom. The devil slouched, as if the tonnage of millennia weighed heavily upon his back. His movements were slow but deliberate. His voice was tired and old, somewhere between a drunk David Attenborough and Katharine Hepburn. But there was definitely a flair in his expression, a confidence to the point of swagger.
Good evening, Mr. Finch. It is a pleasure.
He reached towards his Happy Meal. His fingernails were cherry red. Orlando, still in his work boots and khaki coveralls, jerked the pitchfork at him. The devil was smiling, giving a dismissive wave at the pitchfork with his cigarette hand and opening the Happy Meal with the other.
I'm the devil, Orlando. Do you think I am going to be afraid of a pitchfork?
Orlando's eyes darted to Martin. Martin could read the terror and panic in his face. The groundskeeper ducked towards the fireplace, where he swiped up a stick of kindling, then held it horizontally against the vertical pitchfork to make a cross.
Oh, much better. A pitchfork and firewood. That always does the trick.
The devil turned on the television with a clicker, which he had grabbed while Orlando had been distracted. When he realized his improvised cross was not having the desired effect, Orlando backed towards Martin.
Mr. Finch, what should we do?
Finch didn't know. He was, frankly, awed by the whole situation. Satan was in his living room. What does one do when the Prince of Darkness is in one's house? Offer him a cocktail? The devil flicked through the channels and stopped on the Home Shopping Network. He smiled, settled back into the leather sofa, and began eating. He left the burger alone and concentrated on a container of fries. Martin felt like he needed to take charge of the situation, so he stepped past Orlando and approached the devil. Can I help you? If you really are who you say you are, what do you want? Shush, shush! The devil waved his middle finger. The rest were clutching a bunch of fries. He craned his neck to see around Martin, who was blocking his view of the television. This is my favorite part. Martin did not move. Instead, he opened his mouth to tell the devil he was calling the police. The devil seemed to sense this and preempted him with a shake of his finger. Suddenly, as if he had been there the whole time, Martin was sitting on the couch. The sudden teleportation caused Orlando to scream out. Satan rolled his eyes and turned up the television. Orlando started a series of Hail Marys, his voice growing loud with panic. Finally, the devil sighed, reached into his pocket, and produced 6 paper tickets, which he then threw at Orlando. Here, go to Disney World. There's a ticket for you, your wife and 3 kids. The other one is for your 17-year-old mistress. It should be fun to have her along, too. Oh, don't look surprised. Your wife already knows. Orlando jumped as the tickets landed at his feet. They might as well have been snakes. The devil freed his hand by stuffing his fries into his mouth and pulled the Happy Meal toy out of the box. It was wrapped in a plastic bag with "choking hazard for children 3 and up only" written across it. He looked over to Orlando, who held his ground, although his cross had lowered, his arms growing tired. Or perhaps he was distracted by the tickets at his feet. They were for premium access. Orlando inched away from them, his eyes darting from the devil to the tickets and back. The devil threw the toy at him and said, "Boo." This was all Orlando needed. He dropped the pitchfork and kindling on the ground to turn and sprint into the kitchen. The door to the garage slammed, then opened and slammed again. Mr. Finch heard Orlando's steps returning. His mouth full of fries, the devil said, "I'm from Garner's tickets." Sure enough, a wide-eyed Orlando appeared again in the doorway, leaning over to pick up the tickets. His hand stopped just short of them as he looked to Martin, as if beseeching him for permission. Mr. Finch found this quite out of place. After all, he had not given them to Orlando. But perhaps Orlando wanted to know if Martin would give him the time off. Martin sighed loudly and nodded, more to get Orlando out of the house than anything else. Orlando snatched the tickets up in his fist, pulled them to his chest, and vanished through the kitchen. "That's going to be an interesting family vacation," the devil said, unwrapping his cheeseburger. Martin was tired of sitting. He stood up and walked towards his liquor cabinet. "Can I get you something?" he asked, pressing his thumb to the bioscan pad to open the cabinet. "No, thank you. I don't drink on the job," the devil said, then took a long drink from a supersized soft drink that he had bought with his Happy Meal. Mr. Finch took a shot of Jack Daniel's Blue Label, and then another. He looked over at the devil, who was now watching a news network. He took another shot, then he poured himself a single malt scotch on the rocks and went back to the couch. The devil was finished with his cheeseburger. He had wrapped up the trash in the grease-spotted paper that had contained the burger. With a touch of his finger, all the trash vaporized in a flash of flame. "All that grease is quite an accelerant. Alas, I do miss those styrofoam containers with the CFCs." The devil pulled out another cigarette. "You smoke, but don't drink on the job? What kind of king of vice are you?" The devil sighed. There are some companies that need my patronage more than others. The poor tobacco companies and soda makers are having a hard time right now, so I do what I can to help out. But humanity is never going to give up alcohol," he said, swinging his cigarette hand towards the open liquor cabinet. "The less I take, the more for you." "How gracious." The devil nodded and smiled. "Trust me, I have only top-shelf stuff at the den at home." For a moment, Martin found himself contemplating which brands the devil would have in his den, liquor down to furniture. Were the floors stone, hardwood, or plush? The devil surfed the channels. He stopped on a station where an old-style televangelist, Oral William, was beseeching funds, his hands clasped as if he were praying to the camera. Behind him were rows and rows of young girls, old ladies, and a few men answering telephones. The old-fashioned kind that rang with bells to give the impression that people were calling and calling, giving and giving. The devil pulled out a phone in a red case that matched his nails, dialed, then raised the phone to his ear. Martin noticed it was pierced with 6 silver hoops.
Gahungus, Beelzebub here. How are Oral Bill's ratings?
I see. He took a meditative drag of his cigarette.
Well, let's give him a bump. Pledge 100,000. The number is on the speed dial.
He hung up the phone and replaced it in his jacket pocket. He turned to Martin as if to explain.
Oral Bill masturbates to kitty porn. At least when he's not banging that fine young brunette who is about to answer my phone call.
He gestured to a young, chaste-looking girl answering phone calls in the back. Thick brunette braids rested on her shoulders. She wore a blue shirt that buttoned to her neck. No flesh was revealed, but one would have to be blind to miss her firm, ripe breasts. The unattainable breasts of a Christian woman are such a beautiful thing, Finch reflected.
They're silicone and very attainable, the devil said, reading his mind. Oral Bill bought them for her.
Really? Mr. Finch responded, not particularly surprised at the devil's powers of telepathy. It figured. The devil shook his head.
That's nothing. The woman sitting in the second row, the one with the big crucifix around her neck, she's carrying Oral Bill's child. And that obese woman in the fourth row, Bill couldn't get himself to actually have intercourse with her, so they 69'd. The same with the man in the first row. My goodness. Yep. Good old Bill plays for the home and away teams. He's mostly a bottom when the need arises. Who would have guessed? Wait, hold on, the devil said, leaning forward. He snuffed his cigarette on the coffee table and flung it on the carpet. I have ashtrays, you know. Mr. Finch stood up to pick up the cigarette. The world is my ashtray. Now watch the girl. Mr. Finch turned to the television. The girl with the braids and the breasts was talking on one of the phones. Her blue eyes became enormous, and her lips mouthed the figure 100,000 in disbelief. She was so young and innocent-looking. Finch could hardly imagine her having sex with Oral William. He wondered if the devil was putting him on. The girl looked up to Oral William and called his name. He turned away from the camera. Reverend, a Mr. Robert Love has just pledged $100,000 to the cause. The devil brought his hand to his heart and fluttered his eyelashes in mock abashment. Let me talk to our brother, Oral William said. The devil continued his surprise, pulling out his phone and turning it on as Oral William took the phone from the girl. Finch noticed how their hands lingered as they made contact. I'll be damned, he thought. The devil is right. Robert, I am so glad you have found your path to the Lord. Your contribution will go to help so many, Oral Williams said into the phone while the camera zoomed in close to him. I am so moved, Bill, Satan responded on the couch next to Martin. You have made me see the way. But don't worry. I know that about $80,000 will go in your pocket. $10,000 of which you will spend on halls in the next year. $20,000 towards your gambling habit. The rest you'll embezzle to invest. Wise move. It's good to think about the future. Oral Williams' face was pale. He realized he was still on the air with a sort of start. He flashed his practiced smile and said, Amen, brother. His act was good, Martin thought. Of course, no one watching the television and no one on the set could hear what the devil was saying to Oral William. The girl still beamed as if there were nothing wrong.
You have truly helped me to see how God works in my life. And that is why I have just sent you my son's college fund, the devil continued. There is a great place reserved for you in heaven, Brother Robert. Or William continued to smile broadly at the camera and all his loyal watchers, his eye betraying a twitch. Yes, yes. Keep up the good work, Bill. And, by the way, you might want to have the chick in the second row take a pregnancy test. Just a hunch. The devil hung up. Or William gave a frantic glance towards the woman in the second row. Amen, brother. Yes, God has truly touched you, he said into the phone, a pearl of sweat beading on his temple. And may his light continue to shine down upon you while you journey towards the promised land. God bless you. He hung up the phone and dabbed at his brow with a handkerchief. Mr. Love's contribution is such a blessing. I think we all should take a moment to kneel down and thank God. The devil changed the channel back to news. Pictures of cold, forlorn-looking children flashed across the screen as a concerned anchorman's voice narrated about ongoing sectarian strife in some failed Asian state. Fighting has lessened in past weeks, but that has done nothing to aid relief workers in reaching these innocent victims of war. Government forces are still barring UN inspectors from the town where refugees reported the use of chemical weapons on civilians in an attack that is estimated to have caused over 200 deaths, mostly women and children. Blah, blah, blah. Yes, yes, the poor women and children. No clothes, no food. Things we take for granted. But look at all the airtime they get. And they sure take that for granted. There are kids here in the States that would sell their bodies to get on television. And trust me, many do. He flipped to a reality TV program. See what I mean? Martin sat back on the sofa. Besides the smell of sulfur, which would take weeks to get out of the upholstery, and the fact that he could not use the remote control, the devil was a bit of a remote hog. It was actually fairly interesting talking with his house guest. The devil reached into his pocket and produced a small plastic keychain shaped like a gun, from which dangled an electronic security fob. This, the devil said with pride, is the reason I love America. What is it? Finch asked. The devil took the gun-shaped keychain in his hand and pulled the miniature trigger. A small plastic disc shot out and landed near Martin's single malt. The devil shot a half-dozen more until the gun was empty. Isn't that fantastic? The devil said. That I now have miniature frisbees floating in my drink? Martin, you're so small-brained. These little contraptions are mass-produced. Not only do they promote gun culture, but they make about 100,000 of these things every 3 months. That is about 5 tons of plastic. 1 ton of that plastic would be enough to make water filters for 20 impoverished African villages. Not to mention contraceptive devices, mosquito netting, or those little single-use syringes for vaccination. But does any of that plastic get used there? Absolutely not. Instead, it goes into these inane little toys which get broken and thrown away in about a week. Very interesting. What is the fob for? The gates of hell. The gates of hell are operated by an electronic fob? Essentially, yes. I mean, shouldn't you have some gothic-looking key? Oh, my daughter used to stand there with one. But she's too busy recruiting young ingenues for jobs in the porn industry. So we decided to go remote. How efficient. Thank you. Isn't there supposed to be a dog of some sort too? With 3 heads, if I remember correctly? He's too busy now with his consulting business, private security, Drug lords, arm dealers, and dictators mostly. Oh. A commercial came on urging watchers to buy their products before Christmas, which was a month away. Christmas must be a slow time of year for you, Martin said. You kidding? It's my busiest. Oh, of course, he said, unsure of as to why, though. When do you take a vacation, then? Halloween is always nice. I usually go down to Georgetown in D.C., where they filmed The Exorcist. It's very sentimental for me. I imagine. The news anchor was introducing a story about a cell of domestic terrorists who had been arrested for bombing an Apple store. They were a self-described anti-corporate, anti-technology socialist group dedicated to the cause of sustainable living and ecological responsibility. The bombing had killed 6 staff members, 14 customers, and injured dozens more. Now there are some young people I'm sure you can get behind, Martin said. The devil sneered. I applaud their methodology. Bad message, though. They're against technology and industry. They're socialists. Exactly. I have a lot invested in those things and capitalism in general. Actual cash investments? Martin asked, wondering what the devil would be like as a customer. Think bigger, you hairless primate. What's the first commandment? Martin did his best to rewind back to Sunday school, but he had only gone once, and he didn't think they talked about the commandments that day. It's been a long time. Thou shalt not have any other gods before me. How does that apply? False gods, Martin. Idols. The world is full of them. Take television. Everyone kneeling down on the living room rug before that iridescent idol, beamed to you by satellites. Those orbiting angels of dark technology. And with the internet, what variety! He took a long meditative drag off his cigarette, exhaling clouds of yellow smoke. I used to have to settle for pathetic little sculptures of the owl or golden calves. Back in the Dark Ages, the false god was religion, of all things. 8 crusades ain't bad. Then in the 1930s it was all nationalism, racial identity, and co-opted mythology. Martin furrowed his brow, having lost the thread, but the devil raised his arm out in a salute from the Third Reich, and Martin understood. But TV is so much more interesting, and the internet has even more possibilities, the devil concluded. Martin sat back. This was all very interesting to him, but why was the devil visiting him? He opened his mouth, but Satan had read his mind again. You're wondering why I'm here? Yes, I knew we would have to get down to business eventually. He picked up another cigarette and set it smoldering to life with a touch of his lips, tossing the butt of the prior one onto the carpet once more. We're here to talk about your soul, Martin. Oh, how archaic. I think cliché is the word you are looking for. That too. The devil ignored him and reached into his jacket for a small 6-sided box. It was made of woven bamboo fibers, stained dark blue, almost black. He set it on the table. What is this? It's the box I've been keeping your soul in for the past 50 or so odd years, the devil said. Wait a minute. When did I sell you my soul? You didn't. Your father did when you were little, just as his father did with his soul. See? Shrewd investors know that you have to invest early. Martin picked up the box. The material was light but sturdy. The paint was still shiny. The bamboo fibers caught the light and gave it a layered, iridescent quality. The bottom was unpainted balsa wood. Green letters beside Chinese characters said, Made in China. Where did you get this? Your father gave it to me. It's a valuable family heirloom, he said with respect. Your great-great-grandfather was an English sailor. His wife, Louise, put one of her rings in that box, which her grandmother got from China, and stowed it away in her husband's luggage for him to find when he was at sea. The box and its contents were very precious to him on those long, lonely nights without a woman next to him in bed. While in a Spanish port, he bought a silver bracelet for her, which he also kept in there. Louise was pregnant, and your great-great-grandfather was supposed to return before the baby was due, but he was delayed by a storm. Unfortunately, as that soft portal in Louise opened up, and the embryonic fluids and blood drained out of her, so did her life. Her baby could only be suckled by a corpse. You have a flair for the poetic. The devil grunted before he continued. Gramps returned with the bracelet, ring, and box, only to find his wife dead. So he took his infant daughter to America. The only thing he took with him to remind him of his old life was that box and the 2 pieces of jewelry inside it. In America, they made the cross-country journey to the Northwest Territories. Along the way, they had to sell the bracelet to pay for supplies. Eventually, Gramps became a logger. He finally parted with his wife's ring when he sold it to pay for his daughter's schooling. But he never gave up the box. At one point, he risked his life to run into a burning house to save it. It was all he had left of his wife. When he died at 93, he was clutching it in his arms. His daughter treasured it simply because it was the only thing her father treasured. Her son inherited it, and saved it because she told him to. His son, your grandfather, saved it simply because it was old. When I appeared to your father, he had it sitting on a bookcase holding paper clips. When I appear to people in desperate need and offer them what they seek for their soul, we usually use the nearest receptacle. You would not believe how many souls I have tied off in condoms. Anyway, this box was the nearest thing, and your father, in his irreverence or insolence, or both, gave it to me. So why are you giving it back? Well, we're changing our storage methods. We're going digital now. Everything is binary and digitized, magnetized and harmonized. He broke into a jingle from an old electronics company. Click it, press it, tune it, flick it, tune it on and turn it on. This is what you watch it on. The devil's singing voice was low and exhausted, as if all the sorrows and pain from his realm sounded in it all at once. So what do I do with it? Finch asked. Keep your soul in it or paper clips, for all I care. I only had a 50-year lease on it, so it's yours again. Unless... The doorbell rang. Finch started up, but when he turned the corner of the hallway, he saw that the devil had disappeared from the couch and reappeared in the front hallway before him. Teleportation had to be an exhilarating power, Martin reflected. Then again, telepathy and pyrokinesis would have to be fairly intoxicating as well. His mind wandered again, wondering which he might choose if faced with picking just one. He snapped to as the Prince of Darkness opened the door for whatever delivery man or neighbor had been so unfortunate as to call on Martin just then. This, of course, led to another brief reverie in which he considered the possibility of having the devil over as the guest of honor for a dinner party. It would be hard to imagine a guest of higher status or better name recognition. Already, Martin was certain the conversation would be lively. Religion, politics, nothing would be off limits. The devil walked over the marble floor of the foyer, his boots clacking like hooves on the stone. He opened the door to reveal a priest, alternately crossing the house and himself while mumbling prayers out of a little black book. He was a shortish man with thick glasses and a small balding head. Agatha was behind him. She had covered her head with a blue scarf and was frantically praying a rosary. Neither of them would look directly at Satan. The devil turned back to Mr. Finch. Oh, look, Martin. It's Father O'Leary. What a pleasant surprise. The devil stepped across the threshold, putting his arm around the priest's shoulders and guiding him into the house. He slammed the door in Agatha's face, rolling his eyes as if to say to Martin, "Would you get a load of her?" Father O'Leary's voice rose to a crescendo while he read out a series of verses in Latin. The devil moved past Martin, saying, "Oh, look! Father O'Leary is trying to exorcise me. I appreciate the thought, Father, but I'm already fit as a fiddle." He laughed at his pun. Martin followed. The devil called out behind him, "Martin, get Father O'Leary a drink. Bushmills, neat." Father O'Leary produced a small flask of holy water and began to flick it on the devil's lapels. The water sizzled but didn't do much else. The devil ignored it, bringing Father O'Leary into the living room and sitting him down like a gracious host. "Now, Mr. Finch, let me introduce you to Father O'Leary." The little Irish priest shot Martin a most disapproving stare. Martin was a bit embarrassed about the clutter, the pitchfork, the stick of kindling, not to mention the ashes from the Happy Meal and the scattering of cigarette butts and little plastic discs. The room was quite a fright, really, even without the Prince of Darkness standing in the center of it. It was a situation that was not easily explained. "Father O'Leary is a priest," the devil continued. "That's someone who thinks he is very holy, if you forgot, Martin." "I know that much." "Well, you can't take anything for granted. Come, sit down. Help make Father O'Leary, Father Sean, can I call you Sean? I know, of course I can. Comfortable?" Martin sat down on the couch on the other side of Father Sean O'Leary. "Now, Martin, let me explain. I'm actually a big fan of the clergy," Satan said. "Really? Now that surprises me. Tell me more," Martin said, crossing his legs and looking across Father Sean. "Well, didn't Dante say the hypocrites have their very own ring in hell?" "I suppose he did." "Who am I to argue?" the devil said. "But in addition to squelching women's rights, trying to control their bodies, discriminating against people because of their sexual orientation, and let's not forget, molesting children, covering it up, and harassing the victims, Father Sean here gave a sermon this past Sunday wherein he called homosexuality an abomination, a sickening offense to God. Now that's all old hat, really, for him. But what he didn't know is that young Patrick Evans, in his congregation, a well-meaning Catholic boy of just 15 with the unfortunate luck of having been born gay, heard Father Sean that Sunday, and in a fit of guilt for his sinful nature, hung himself in his parents' basement." "That's terrible," Martin said. "I know," the devil said, slapping the priest on the back. "Spreading hate, alienation, and suicidal self-loathing. It's some of their best work since the Inquisition or the Crusades. Now, Martin, pour him a drink." Mr. Finch went over to the liquor cabinet, a little reluctantly, if he was honest with himself. He had gay friends, after all, but he was host, so he poured a glass of Bushmills neat, the way the devil had said the priest liked it. Father Sean O'Leary's hands were shaking. Martin took one and curled it around the glass. Father O'Leary mumbled to himself, "Though you stand before the gates of hell, and death is at your side, be not afraid." "I know death," the devil said. "Do you really?" Mr. Finch was interested again. "Does he work for you? I've always wondered about that." "No, we are both independent enterprises, but we collaborate. We have professional courtesy for one another. He's terribly unfashionable, though. The Phantom has got no style. Still wears that Karen robe and carries that grim sigh that he's been hauling around since, God knows when." The snippet of a classic Led Zeppelin song blared from the television. The devil smiled, cupping his hand to his ear to better hear the song. "One of my favorite bands," he said. Martin sensed the setup. I'll bite. Why them?
Consummate rip-off artists, along with that King Bubba, Elvis.
Rip-offs?
You are clearly not a music man, Martin.
No, not really.
Well, I have a reputation to uphold. It's good to know what the kids are listening to. But I'm a big fan of misappropriation without proper attribution. Page, Plant, Presley, they were thieves, you know, stealing from other artists, mostly artists of color. A good bit of racism and cultural exploitation gets the old heart racing, the devil said, patting his chest. Right, Father? You Christians did it, stealing the dates of festivals from pagans, druids, and the Celts, you sneaky boys, you.
The devil pinched the priest's cheek. Mr. Finch hoped that Father O'Leary was not too uncomfortable. The priest had grown quiet but was sweating now through his shirt. He noticed that the priest had drunk his entire shot of whiskey while they were not looking. The devil smiled, patting the priest on the knee.
That's a good little whiskey priest. Martin, get him another. Make it a double.
Martin did, but when he returned to the couch and handed the drink to the priest, who drank it in one eager gulp, his eyes bulging, the devil stood up, stretched to his full height, and straightened his jacket. He pulled his spent cigarette from his mouth and aimed to flick it towards the kitchen doorway, but the pitchfork and Happy Meal toy were already left there. So he spun around on his heel and fired the butt into an empty corner.
The time is coming for me to depart.
So soon? Martin asked.
I will leave you with some parting wisdom.
The devil bent down so that he was eye to eye with Father O'Leary, his crimson lips moving so close to the priest's face that, at first, Martin thought he would kiss him. But instead he spoke in a soft, tender voice.
Yes, Father, there was a time when man lived on bread alone, when he had not yet invented his companions, society, capitalism, consumption, marketing, and style. These were the horsemen who cried out, "You are lacking, primate. Spend, and you will be saved."
The devil turned to address them both.
Can you imagine what it was like without the little products that sit in your bathroom? There are still people who don't use these things. Their complexions are greasy, their hair oily and flaky, and their breath goes unchecked. The horror! Thank goodness deodorant keeps us from being too human.
He turned once more to Father Sean O'Leary, a warm smile across his face. He gave the priest a light punch on the shoulder.
Keep up the good work, old chap. You all never cease to be entertaining. I mean, have you ever stopped to consider the orientation of a god of love, transformed into a man who hung out with a bunch of other men, traveling, eating, sleeping, even kissing them? I mean, we all know how effectively you all excised his marriage to Mary Magdalene from Scripture. Nice job, by the way. But really, when your deity is a god of love, you have got to realize that he swung both ways, right? Blasphemer, may you burn in the fires of hell, Father O'Leary stammered. Don't threaten me with a good time. The devil shrugged before making his way to the front door. I must be going now, Martin. At exactly 11:23 Eastern Standard Time, Alfonso Rodriguez will be driving by this home in his taxicab, after taking Mrs. Henderson of 6 Oliver Lane home from the airport. He just overcharged her $5. He makes about $40 a night in overcharging riders. But not tonight.
Because you are hitching a ride with him? Martin asked, aroused by his proximity to prophecy.
No. I'd let him overcharge me.
Remember the J.D., corrupter of mankind and all. No, I'm afraid that at 11:25, a deer will jump out in front of the cab, startling Mr. Rodriguez, causing him to swerve, then overcompensate, crash, and subsequently die. Death called me this morning and told me this one would be mine. There seems to be an unresolved issue of a hit and run involving a 3-year-old girl in the projects, which occurred one night when the Fonz had partaken a little too liberally in the juice of joy, the blow of bliss, and the love of halls. So now he will be spending some time with me. Actually, all time. The devil let out a weary laugh at his own joke. He opened the door, revealing Agatha, who was sprawled across the front stoop. You'll want to call the coroner for her. Heart attack, brought on by stress and trauma, he said, stepping over the body. She's dead? Martin asked, coming outside. As a doornail. She's not one of mine, though. Tragic. I know. I could have done great things to her, but she was a virtuous woman. Oh, no, I meant tragic that she passed. She had family, Martin said. This also meant he would have to find a new maid. The devil was already halfway down the sidewalk. Martin cleared his throat, suddenly remembering. What about the box? What about it? The devil asked, without checking his stride. Well, what do I do with it? My soul, I mean. What about this whole wealth and material gain stuff? You know, the Dr. Faustus thing? What's in it for me? Accrued rewards over time, investment risks, you know, the usual. The devil stopped, turned on his heel, and his lips formed a long and sinister smile. His eyes were dark and laughing pearls as he stalked back up the sidewalk. When he was close enough that the smell of sulfur once again permeated Martin's lungs, Satan took Martin by the head, his thumb pressing, warm and abrasive, above his eyes. Oh, Martin, I'm not worried about you. He took a drag off his cigarette and exhaled a cloud of yellow smoke. It curled and swam about his shoulders as he turned one last time. Martin Finch stood there watching Satan walk down his driveway, the gold sequins on his boots throwing off sparks and beams into the cloud following him, as he croaked out a few bars of Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven. At that moment, he more resembled an old Vegas lounge singer than fallen angel or the Prince of Darkness, corrupter of hearts. Then he was gone. Martin took a deep breath of the air. The sulfur had dissipated. Well, if that was not interesting. He stepped over Agatha's body. He would have to make sure his story was straight before he called the police. Maybe he should call his lawyer first. He needed another drink. He returned to the living room to find the priest and the bottle of Bushmills missing. He poured himself one more single malt. Before he drank it, he froze. The box. The little blue-black box was waiting on the coffee table. Martin set down his drink, crossed the room and reached for it, his hands trembling, more from exhilaration than fear. He picked up the box. It was light and sturdy. He was still impressed with how the bamboo material gave off such an elegant sheen, even in the dim light of his living room. It had to be expensive, priceless perhaps, he thought. Where was Antiques Roadshow when you needed them? With one of his manicured nails, he worked the top loose. The inside lip and edge were covered with black velvet that hissed as he opened it. He gazed into its interior, his heart leaping with expectation, before it was replaced with a suffocating heaviness. It weighed down his chest, sinking into his innards like a coffin into a swamp. He tossed the lid to the table, turned over the box and shook it over his hand before slapping it on the bottom like a bottle of ketchup. Nothing was produced. It was empty.